Hello again everyone, my name is Derailious, and today we're going to be talking about something very interesting. Recently, while hosting a stream, Deuces, a former Hypixel Skyblock admin, showed up in chat and gave a lot of information about the future of the game, his experience at Hypixel, and a bunch of other information. I want to preface this by saying this was not a formal interview. None of the things that he is saying should be taken as any more than his personal opinions, and a lot of what he is saying is clouded by the fact that he hasn't worked at the company for over a year now. But a lot of what he has said is still relevant for the future of the game, and it gives an insight into how the internals of Hypixel actually works, which is something I myself have been looking into for a long time now. I hope you enjoy the video. Once again, make sure you keep everything he says with a grain of salt, and also don't go out and look for the guy, don't try to harass him. He's clearly having a great time working at his current company now, and there is no point in actually going after him for info, as he doesn't really seem to be wanting to do an actual formal interview. So, let's get right into it. Starting off with the beginning of the discussion, he showed up when I was talking about how smaller servers, like Monumenta and Windcraft, are able to make theoretically more content. He showed up and stated, "You have to think about how it works from a network perspective or a database perspective. When you have 100 players, you can make anything look fast. Those servers don't operate at the scale of Hypixel does, and it's not a one-to-one comparison." He was talking about how things like the Crimson Isle, for example, push 1.8 to its limits, whereas things in Monumenta, for example, may not otherwise do so, even if they are physically larger. It's just that Hypixel is such a large server that making content for it has to be that much more strenuous, whether it be in terms of databases or making the network actually function properly. This is something I personally agree with, and in terms of my own thoughts, I'll do a full in-depth analysis later, but initially I was skeptical, but after a little bit more discussion, he convinced me of that fact. Continuing on with this point, one of the things that he stated they had to do was kill a bunch of mobs and quests because of hitting technical limits with TPS. This is referring more specifically to the Crimson Isle and not to any other pieces of content. When I mentioned that they could potentially split the island up in order to make more overall content, he stated, "You can, but by the time we discovered that issue, it was too late. It would have delayed the update by another 8 months. This seems like an internal timetable that they had, and it seems like in order to make the Crimson Isle a lot better, it would have taken a lot more time. This might explain the initial state that the Crimson Isle was released in." When talking more specifically about the Foraging update, Deuces stated, "It's probably the most challenging thing that Hypixel has worked on in my opinion, because of tech debt." Tech debt is something that you'll be hearing a lot in this conversation, and essentially what it means is that code from the old days of Hypixel or the old days of Skyblock, whether that be 2019 or 2013, is limiting the development of new content. Because that code is so old, and because they're trying to move to a new version, it's going to be incredibly difficult to go back, refix everything, and then make the server function on a new version of Minecraft. This is the general explanation he gives for why this update has taken so long. Furthering that point, he states, "They have to bring the server 7 years into the future, then optimize it so it runs fast." This is a general opinion that I've seen a lot of people mention, and I agree with this one. This one is pretty well known. Of course, they're going to have to bring a lot of the infrastructure of the server forward, and it's not as easy as just changing a few variables around. Things are rewritten in entirely different formal languages, not literally a coding language, but in terms of the actual way Minecraft works. A lot of the variables, numbers, things of that nature have deeply changed since 2013 and 2014, and all of that information needs to be taken into account when updating to a new version of Minecraft. When I brought up the fact that maybe the player base would like a community manager or someone to come forward and talk about the information mentioned in this chat, he stated, "I don't think that's possible. Most of the player base wouldn't get it." This was the one thing I disagreed with Deuces on, but I do understand where he's coming from. A lot of that technical jargon goes over a lot of players' heads, myself included. I'm not the most technical, but I do think getting basic information out there, like, hey, we can't make this update super quickly because we're updating to 1.20 and it's super difficult, would go a long way. This is just his personal opinion though, so I'm gonna leave it at that. Moving on to his opinions on the release of the Foraging update, he states, "I think the main problem is telling players about updates that may not be coming soon. Like my personal opinion, without knowing the details of the upgrade to 1.20, is that you won't see Foraging until 2025. I personally appreciated his honesty on this subject. Obviously, he hasn't been with the company for quite a while, so if there's anything you should take with a grain of salt, it's this statement, but do take that in mind. Keep that idea and that opinion in mind. This is a former admin stating that he doesn't think he'll see it until 2025. Once again, not factual by any metric. He's been off the dev team for a couple years now, but it is still important to bring up that this is his personal opinion. When I mentioned how there was a statement in the beginning of 2024 about wanting to get it on alpha, the Foraging update on alpha, in 2024, he stated, quote, "I saw it and I laughed." This goes into the fact that he is pretty pessimistic seemingly about the Foraging update, but it also makes sense considering some statements he makes later. He then follows up by stating, "I'm not a part of the company, so maybe it releases," and in that case he means releases like in 2024. But like, I work at one of the biggest tech companies in the world now, and I think deving Hypixel is much harder. Minecraft is much harder to work with, and especially at the scale that Hypixel works at. This kind of gets into the heart of the issue. Minecraft is very poorly optimized for game development. This is part of the reason why Mojang themselves have been pretty hesitant or conservative in terms of their update sizes. Minecraft is just not built for this. For whatever reason, for whatever main way that Mojang has developed the game, it's just incredibly difficult to work on. And that difficulty is getting passed on to both developers of Mojang themselves and also developers of servers like Hypixel. When I further asked about a community manager, he stated, "I don't think you're going to get one anytime soon. Gaming is in a pretty bad place right now, and most places aren't hiring unless that person can have a direct impact on money. I wouldn't say it's news, it's just opinion." Once again, this goes back to the idea, this is just one man's opinions. Do not take anything he says as guaranteed fact. He hasn't worked at the company in a number of years now, but I think it's personally important to know this information, even if it's not fact, even if it's just opinion. Getting something out there for the community is a good thing. He follows up by stating, "I don't know the financial situation of Hypixel, and I wouldn't be able to comment on it if I did. I'm gonna not really labor on this point too much. This is just, once again, his point." When asked further about the Foraging update or whether it'll be split up, notably with the fact that the 2024 statement said the first island of the Foraging update, he stated, "I think if they do release it early, it's either going to be released in parts or with limited features." This makes sense. This goes back to what they stated. They said the first island of the Foraging update. It seems like it's going to be multiple different islands or multiple parts, kind of like how the Rift is, and it seems like we're going to be getting the first part of the Foraging update this year, with maybe future islands coming in future years. He also states they have very good devs, they being Hypixel, some of the best that I've worked with. Considering that he works at one of the biggest companies in the world right now, that is a pretty impressive statement, but also considering how people like Jaya and Minikloon are, I really do understand this. The developers do care and they seem to be trying their best. They are just struggling with endless tech debt. Furthering on that point, he states, "Hard to tell. For example, it seems like Hypixel has been working on a lot of tech debt. I've seen a lot of posts about migrating to new backend systems, which hints that it's dead. It might be prep for 1.20, but I don't know as I don't work there." When someone stated, "Well, why is it such a difficult thing to do?" he stated, "But they do. For example, it could be that System X doesn't support Y, so you need to migrate to a new system before you can work on content Y." Basically, the player that he was responding to was asking, well, why can't they just work on the new content at the same time that they work on updating? He also states, when I asked how many people there were working on Skyblock, "I don't remember, there was a lot of people working on it." He then continues to state there were a bunch of people part-time like me, and when I said around 24 people, which was my previous best guess, he said you could count the devs on the Crimson Isle post to get a baseline. There were 22 people who worked on that post. That was about 2 years ago. I imagine it's expanded a little bit since then, so if I had to give you guys a guess, this is my personal opinion, around 25 to 35 people working on Skyblock specifically. When somebody asked why don't devs actually state which updates they've worked on anymore at the bottom of posts, he stated, "I think that's by design. In my personal experience, people got harassed as devs for it." which makes sense. People are just the worst in this community. He recalls that people were getting harassed, which does suck and obviously is like the worst thing ever. Also, do not go out of your way to go after Deuces for more information about any of this. Once again, he is just a guy living his life. Let him live it. Let him not interact with Skyblock if he doesn't want to. That is my opinion and my, thoughts on that subject. When somebody asked about EU servers, he stated, "I don't know, are there a lot of players from the EU? They would need to weigh the cost versus the reward. You can't justify doing the changes if it's only going to be a small percentage of players." This is pretty interesting to me. It does make sense, obviously, if they don't have a huge European player base, percentage-wise, they're not going to be really interested in making EU servers, even when it updates to 1.20 or 1.21. He also states, "I think this has been mentioned also, but Hypixel uses a highly optimized jar for 1.8, so to get to 1.20 they would need to do the same, and that's built off of 9 years of changes. So keep that in mind, going back into the technical debt. There is a lot that needs to be done in order to make the Foraging update work, and not just the Foraging update, but the whole server work in a new version of Minecraft." His personal hot take is that instead of upgrading Minecraft, Hypixel should instead make Skyblock in a real engine like Unreal. This would be entirely separate, but it would allow for the technical debt issues to be completely evaporated, and also allow for content to be made a lot quicker. The downside is that a lot of people like Minecraft, myself included. I don't know if I would play a version of Hypixel Skyblock that's in an Unreal engine, but obviously this was just his personal thought and hot take. This is not something that's actually happening, and it's not something that's actually on the table. So don't run down to the comments or the forums and be like, "Oh my god, Hypixel's gonna make a different game." That's not what's happening here. He just gave his opinion on what he thinks should have been done. When I asked what his favorite project to work on was, he stated unreleased project, which I thought was interesting. Even though he hasn't been dev for a couple years, what he has been working on, or what he last worked on, seemed to be his favorite thing, and also hasn't released yet. When I asked whether his experience at Hypixel was good or bad, he stated it was 99% good. I learned a lot, which I think is pretty telling. He then follows up by stating, "I would have stayed if the pay at my current company wasn't so much higher. Like, I'm making triple here. No, but tech pays so much more. So even if the job is less interesting, I take the pay every time. This is reasonable. The games industry is known for not really paying people a crazy amount, and the tech industry in America, at least, is known for paying crazy amounts of money." Wrapping up here, he mentioned at the end, "I just saw their posting right now, as in job posting, user interface artist, which means making stuff for the UI. Understanding of the Hypixel community and games, including Hypixel Skyblock." This kind of takes me back to that post that they made last May, where they showed off a bunch of UI elements that were detailed and graphically organized, and they looked really, really good. I hope we see something like that in games soon, and I think that Deuces really, timed out at the conversation here. Probably had something to do. I wrapped up the stream a few minutes later, so yeah. Overall, I think that Deuces seemed to enjoy his time on the Hypixel server. That was something he stated himself. He thinks that the people at Hypixel are very talented, and he thinks that they're just struggling with an immense amount of tech debt, which isn't really their fault. If I had to guess, that is the reason for the Foraging update being delayed so long, and they believe that the player base won't really understand if they try to tell it to us, so they're rather keeping quiet about it and trying to do the best they can to release updates. This also makes sense why we're seeing so many QOL updates. Those are relatively easier to make, considering the tech debt. Those updates not only fix technical problems, but also add new things for the player base at the same time, so they could be a good alternative while they wait for the Foraging update to finish development. Seeming like they're going to split up the Foraging update, that's something that I think a lot of people have expected. The first island of the Foraging update is something we're likely to get this year. I don't think we're going to see the whole thing in 2025, that doesn't really make sense. It seems like it's going to instead be split up, with the first part in this year and the next part next year, which, makes sense. It was interesting talking to him about the Crimson Isle and all that stuff. I think it was a super interesting conversation, and I'll link the stream down below, and also a timestamp where you can go and start hearing all that information yourself. Once again, I really appreciate him just being there. It was very nice of him to do. He didn't have to talk at all, and it was, super great from a community perspective to actually hear that information. Him just saying, "I think it's going to be 2025, even if it was a little bit of a gut punch, it did make me feel a little bit better because we got some concrete information, and that is something really nice. Obviously, it's just one man's opinions. He was not, contacted by Hypixel to say this stuff. It was just his thoughts, so leave it at that. Leave your thoughts down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope to do more journalism style stuff like this. Maybe I'll try to get an admin on to actually talk about this. If any admins are watching, I would love to talk to you. And yeah, my name is Derailious. Thank you so much for watching this video till the end. And look to the future, fellas, because I will see you then.